I would submit to you that that need for good men and good women, godly men and godly women to respond to God's call and be a part of inviting people into a relationship with God, that need is still present in our world today. I would hope you would agree that that's true. And so I just want to challenge you all to ask yourself that question. Is God calling me to something more? And maybe today, when you get home after the picnic, you can just stop and begin to ask yourself that question. Just sit down, look yourself in the mirror and just say, is God calling me to something more? Because the call of God in your life is dynamic, okay? And sometimes you might think, well, I've been in this career or in this season of my life for a long, long time, and yet I believe that God's calling me to something totally different. Scott mentioned that we're already seeing this happen in our church. Just this week, I filled out a reference form with the International Mission Board for a young couple here in our church, and that's Grady and Caitlin Schaefer. And they're dealing with that question, is God calling us to something more? And so they're looking at the possibility of serving 2 years or so with the International Mission Board in another country. And it's a big deal, you all. I've known Grady since he was 9 years old. Grady, 9, okay? And I've known Caitlin since she was a young teenage girl, and I love them both, and I'm so incredibly proud of them. But I will also tell you, because I've known them both for so long, I will tell you, they are regular people, okay? They are not superheroes. They're just regular folks, okay? They've got strengths and weaknesses. They've got great qualities. They've got shortcomings. They're just like all of us. And I'm telling you this with their permission because they just want to make themselves available to you because you might be curious about their calling and how they sense that God is calling them and what that might mean for you, because you might be thinking, I'm just a regular person. How could God possibly be calling me? And I would submit to you that Elisha was a regular person, and God called him and helped transform a nation through him. And I would submit to you that God is calling Grady and Caitlin, and they're regular people, just ordinary folks. And perhaps God wants to do something truly extraordinary through their life. And you might be wondering, David, I don't even know how I would be able to tell if God was calling me to something or not. So I just want to tell you something that a friend of mine told me a lot of years ago, and I have never forgotten it. His name also happened to be David, and he was serving as a pastor in a church. I had known David for years, and he was considering going overseas. And so we were just having this conversation about that huge change in his life, right? And he said, I'm dealing with that question. Is God calling me to something more? And so we're talking about this, and he said, David, the craziest thing's been going on. He said, right now, I feel like a potted plant. And he said, I'm flourishing, I'm doing fine, everything is good. And I feel like God has reached down, and he's grabbed me, and he's shaking me loose by the roots. He said, and God's just rocking me back and forth, and he's just preparing to uproot me. And he said, I imagine if you're actually a real potted plant and the gardener comes along and grabs you and begins to shake you and uproot you, if you're the plant, that would be terrifying. Because you're like, what are you doing? I'm doing fine right here. But he said, I've decided that if God indeed uproots me, he's going to plant me in a place far better than I can ever imagine. It may be that for you, if you begin to feel like, you know what, I just sense that God has me and he's just shaking me and he's uprooting me, it may be that God is calling you. And you need to be responsive to that. Because I don't believe that God is haphazard in who he calls. I just don't believe he is. I believe God calls with great intentionality and with great purpose. But he doesn't call perfect people. He calls flesh and blood, real people with real passions and real problems. And I can just tell you, some of the people that I served along on the mission field, or some of the people that I serve alongside in church ministry, some of them are incredible people. They just are so good in relationships, and everything just comes so easily for them in dealing with other people. But they can't organize their way out of a wet paper sack, right? And then I know other people, they are incredibly organized and they really struggle in relationships. And you know what I've seen? God calls them all. And some people have a beautiful eye for color and for beauty. And you see them and they're walking down the street and all their clothing is perfectly put together. And other folks walk down the street and their socks don't even match. And you know what? God calls all of them to serve him. And he calls people out with great intentionality. And what they have in common isn't their skill set or their capacity. It's the work of the Spirit of God in their life. And so I just challenge you today to ask yourself that question. Is God calling me to something more?